She was Omega Seraphina Cole, the royal pack's beautiful, untouchable tragedy, known only as the Ice Queen. He was Alpha King Kieran Blackwell, a ruler burdened by duty and surrounded by the casual arrogance of power. The cruelest thing he ever did was make her believe she was loved. The hardest thing he ever did was prove that she was. The air in the grand ballroom of the Silver Moon Citadel was thick with the scent of pine, old money, and unspoken power. Alpha King Kieran Blackwell stood on the dais, a granite statue of authority, his silver eyes scanning the crowd of swirling silks and pressed uniforms. He was bored. The annual Unity Gala was a political necessity, a night for reinforcing alliances and displaying the strength of the royal pack. But for Kieran, it was a gilded cage. Every she-wolf of notable bloodline preened and postured, their scents blooming with cloying sweetness, each one a potential mate, a future queen. His wolf, a restless beast of shadow and storm, paced within him, unimpressed. It wanted something real, something that did not smell of ambition. Kieran understood that restlessness better than anyone knew. His father, the late Alpha King Aldrich, had ruled the royal pack with a fist of iron and a heart of stone. He had chosen Kieran's mother not out of love, but out of strategy, a mating contract signed in ink and sealed with a handshake, never a kiss. Kieran had grown up watching his mother wither in the cold shadow of that transactional bond, her warmth slowly leached away by a man who saw her as a political asset rather than a partner. On the night she died, Aldrich had attended a council meeting. He had not even been in the room. Kieran had held her hand as the light left her eyes, and he had sworn two things to himself. First, that he would never become his father. And second, that love was either everything or it was nothing. The irony of what he was about to do would haunt him for the rest of his life. His gaze snagged on a figure near the frosted glass doors leading to the winter garden. Omega Seraphina Cole. She was not dancing, not speaking, not even pretending to enjoy the festivities. Dressed in a simple gown the color of a winter sky, she was a pocket of stillness in the vibrant chaos. Her silver blonde hair was pulled back in a severe knot, emphasizing the sharp, elegant lines of her face. She was beautiful in a way that made something ache behind his ribs, like staring at a star you knew you could never reach. Everyone knew her story. The lone survivor of a rogue attack that had claimed her entire family years ago. She had been found, a child of 10, curled beside her parents' still forms, refusing to cry, refusing to speak. She had never been the same. The pack whispered she was wolfless, her trauma having killed the beast within her before it could ever emerge. They called her the Ice Queen. But as Kieran watched her, his wolf did something strange. It stopped pacing. It went utterly still, its ears pricked forward, a low whine building in the back of his mind. There was something in her scent, buried deep beneath the cold stone and winter air, something faint and flickering, like an ember trapped under ash. His wolf strained toward it, recognition without a name, a pull that made no logical sense. She was supposedly wolfless. There should have been nothing for his wolf to recognize. And yet... Staring again, Your Majesty? Cassian, his beta and oldest friend, drawled beside him, a smirk playing on his lips. His scent was sharp, like ozone and confidence. Kieran's jaw tightened. I'm observing my pack. You're observing one particular Omega who looks like she'd rather be anywhere else, Ronan, his third, chimed in, his own scent a mix of dry earth and mischief. The Ice Queen. A lost cause, that one. Colder than the Northern Territories. No one is a lost cause, Kieran said, his tone clipped. It was an Alpha King's duty to care for all his pack, even the broken ones. Yet something about Seraphina was more than duty. It was that strange magnetic pull his wolf felt, that low thrum of recognition that defied reason. She was an Omega, possibly wolfless. He was the Alpha King, whose mate needed to be strong, a true Luna to lead beside him. His wolf disagreed. It cared about that faint ember buried in her scent, and it wanted to coax it into flame. Cassian laughed, a low, rumbling sound. Always the noble king. But I've seen the way you watch her. You're intrigued. You, who are bored by every eligible Alpha-born female in the kingdom, are fascinated by the one woman who wouldn't give you the time of day. It's a challenge, Ronan added, his eyes gleaming. And our king has never backed down from a challenge. The seed of an idea, reckless and arrogant, took root in the fertile ground of their banter. Kieran felt a familiar spark of competitive fire, a welcome distraction from the crushing weight of his crown. His father's voice echoed in his memory, cold and practical. Sentiment is weakness, Kieran. A king does not feel, he conquers. For a fleeting, terrible moment, Kieran wanted to prove his dead father right. He wanted to prove that he could play the game, that his heart was as untouchable as his crown. It was the worst impulse of his life, and he gave in to it. She is a member of my pack who is clearly in pain. Her distance is a shield. Or maybe she's just cold, Cassian countered, leaning closer. I bet you can't do it. I bet even the great Alpha King Kieran Blackwell can't melt the Ice Queen. Kieran's eyes narrowed, a glint of gold flashing in their silver depths. And what, precisely, would I be doing? Ronan rubbed his hands together. Make her fall for you. Not just a polite smile, a real thaw, a first laugh, a first willing touch. Hell, the first time she says she loves you. We'll even make it interesting. A purse of 500 gold for the first genuine smile. 1,000 for the first time she initiates physical contact. And the grand prize, 5,000 gold if you can get her to confess her love for you. All before the spring equinox. It was foolish. It was beneath him. It was cruel to her, but the arrogance of his youth, the part that was still trying to prove he was not his father while using his father's playbook, roared to life. He looked back at Serafina. She stood alone, a solitary moon in a sky full of glittering, disposable stars. You're on, Kieran said, his voice a low growl. Prepare your gold, my friends. The Ice Queen will melt for her king. His wolf snarled in the back of his mind, a sharp, protesting sound he chose to ignore. This was a game. A simple, harmless game. He would win, as he always did, and then move on. He had no idea that in accepting the bet, he had just sealed his own fate. Serafina felt his eyes on her long before he approached. It was a physical sensation, a pressure against the back of her neck, a prickling warmth that disturbed the careful chill she cultivated around herself. She did not need to turn to know it was the Alpha King. His presence was like a change in barometric pressure, a dominant force that bent the very air around him. She hated it. Power like his was a storm, and she had learned long ago that storms only ever destroyed what she loved. She worked in the Royal Archives, a sanctuary of dust and silence, where the dead past was far more comforting than the living present. Her days were ordered, predictable. She woke before dawn, ate her breakfast alone at the small wooden table in her quarters, always placing her plate in the exact center, flanked by her cup on the right and her napkin on the left. It was a habit from childhood, from the kitchen table where she had sat between her mother and father, the plate always centered, because both of them would reach over to steal bites and make her laugh. Now, no one reached. The symmetry was just emptiness with structure. She cataloged histories, repaired ancient scrolls, and breathed in the scent of aging paper and ink. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of late afternoon, when the light came through the arched windows just right, she would hum. It was always the same melody, a lullaby her mother used to sing, something about the moon cradling wolf pups in silver light. She never hummed more than a few bars before catching herself and stopping, pressing her lips together as if she could seal the memory back inside. It was a small life, a quiet one, but it was hers. These mandatory galas were an intrusion, a noisy, scented assault on the peace she fought so hard to maintain. Omega Cole. His voice was a deep baritone, smoother than she expected, like river stones worn by a current. She turned slowly, schooling her features into a mask of polite neutrality. Up close, he was even more imposing. Taller than any other wolf she knew, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his formal black uniform. His hair was the color of midnight, and his eyes, those startling silver eyes, seemed to see right through the walls she had spent a decade building. Her heart gave a painful lurch, and deep in her chest, so faint she almost missed it, something stirred. A warmth, barely there, like a candle flame seen through fog. She dismissed it as anxiety. "Your Majesty," she murmured, her voice carefully devoid of emotion. She executed a perfect, shallow curtsy, a gesture of respect required by protocol, nothing more. "You are not enjoying the celebration," he stated. It was not a question. "I am fulfilling my duty to attend, Alpha King," she replied, her gaze fixed on the medals adorning his chest. Looking into his eyes felt dangerous. A faint smile touched his lips. Duty can be a heavy burden. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, then returning to her. "I've been told the palace gardens are beautiful under the winter moon. Perhaps a brief escape from this duty would be welcome?" Her internal alarms screamed. Alphas, especially the Alpha King, did not seek out the company of quiet, broken Omegas. They sought power, prestige, strong mates with impressive bloodlines. She was none of those things. "Thank you for the offer, Your Majesty, but I am content here." "Are you?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Your scent. It speaks of loneliness, Seraphina." Her breath caught. He used her given name, and he spoke of her scent, the one thing she could not control. Most wolves' scents were a vibrant expression of their emotions. Hers was faint, smelling of cool stone, winter air, and the barest hint of something sad and forgotten, like faded lavender. For him to not only notice it, but to name the core of it, felt like a violation. "My scent is my own business, Your Majesty," she said, her voice turning sharp and brittle, the first crack in her icy facade. He did not flinch. Instead, he took a half-step closer. "Forgive me, that was presumptuous." He held out his arm. "Allow me to rephrase. I find myself in need of a brief respite from the noise. Would you do your king the honor of accompanying him for a walk in the garden? As two members of the same pack seeking a moment of peace." The request was framed perfectly, a command disguised as a plea, an appeal to pack unity she could not refuse without causing a scene. With a tiny, frustrated sigh, she placed her fingertips on his offered arm. The fabric of his uniform was coarse, but beneath it she could feel the radiating heat of him, a furnace of life that was both terrifying and strangely compelling. As she touched him, that faint warmth in her chest flared again, just for a moment, like a spark landing on dry kindling before guttering out. Her hand almost jerked back, but she steadied herself. It was nothing. It was nerves. As he led her toward the glass doors, she felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her back. The Ice Queen and the Alpha King. The whispers had already begun. Seraphina ignored them, focusing on the cold night air that greeted them. She did not know that this was the first move in a game she was not even aware she was playing. The next morning, Seraphina was back in her sanctuary. The scent of old parchment and binding glue was a balm to her frayed nerves. The encounter with the king had left her unsettled, a stone thrown into the placid waters of her existence. She was meticulously repairing the spine of a book on ancient lunar rituals when a shadow fell over her desk. "Good morning, Seraphina." She looked up. It was him, King Kirin. He was dressed not in his formal uniform, but in simple black trousers and a gray tunic that made him seem younger, more approachable, and more dangerous. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice tight. "The archives are generally restricted." "I am the king," he said, a hint of amusement in his tone. "I restrict. I do not become restricted." He held up a leather-bound volume. "I came to return this, The Wars of the Shadow Packs, a fascinating read, though the author's bias toward the Sunstone Pack is rather blatant." She recognized the book. It was from his private library, not the general archives. She had mentioned it in passing in the garden the night before, a fleeting comment about its historical inaccuracies. He had listened. He had remembered. "I will have a page return it to your study," she said, reaching for the book, wanting him gone. "There is no need," he said, placing it on the corner of her desk, his fingers brushing hers for a fraction of a second. A jolt shot up her arm, and with it came that strange inner warmth again, stronger this time, a low hum in her chest that felt almost like a growl trying to form. She snatched her hand back. His eyes, silver and intense, held hers. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of surprise, as if he had felt something too. "I was hoping you might recommend another," he said. And so it began. Every day, Kieran found a reason to visit the archives. He brought her books, asked her opinions on historical treaties, and engaged her in quiet debates about the migration patterns of the first shifters. He never used his alpha command, never pushed, never crowded her. He simply existed in her space, a warm, steady presence that slowly began to wear down her defenses. He learned that she preferred tea with a hint of bergamot, that she had a secret fondness for poetry, that the scent of old books was the only one that truly made her feel safe. She learned things about him too, despite herself. She learned that he rubbed the back of his neck when he was thinking, that he read poetry himself but would never admit it to his court, that his laugh, when it was genuine and not the practiced sound he used at political functions, was low and warm and slightly surprised, as if joy kept catching him off guard. One afternoon, a week into his campaign, he found her staring at a high, arched window at the falling snow. "A beautiful sight," he said softly, coming to stand beside her. "It's cold," she replied automatically, "and it buries everything." "It also makes everything clean and new," he countered. He was holding 2 steaming mugs. He offered one to her. The scent of bergamot and honey wafted up. She hesitated, then took it, her fingers wrapping around the warm ceramic. "You remembered," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I remember everything you say," he said, his voice a low murmur. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the snow blanket the world in white. For the first time in a decade, Serafina felt a sense of companionship, of shared peace. A small, tentative smile touched her lips, fragile as a crocus pushing through frozen earth. And as she smiled, something in her chest shifted. Not the sharp jolt she had felt before, but a slow, spreading warmth. Deep within her, in a place she had long believed was dead and empty, something turned over in its sleep. Kieran's breath hitched. The smile. It transformed her face, chasing away the shadows and revealing a glimpse of the woman beneath the ice. His heart hammered against his ribs, and in that moment, a horrifying thought struck him. He was not happy because he had scored the first point in his bet. He was happy because she was smiling. The 500 gold coins Cassian now owed him meant nothing. The victory felt hollow, tainted, like biting into a perfect fruit and finding it rotten at the core. His wolf surged forward with a fierce, possessive tenderness. It did not want to win a bet. It wanted to make her smile again, and every day for the rest of their lives. The weeks that followed saw a slow, cautious thaw. Kieran's daily visits became the anchor of Serafina's days, though she would never have admitted it. He brought her a rare, pressed moon-petal flower he had found on a trip to the southern border, knowing she was cataloging books on lunar botany. He had searched for it himself, spending hours in the frost-bitten meadows beyond the border garrison, his fingers numb and his wolf whining with impatience, because she had mentioned in passing that she had only ever seen a moon petal in illustrations. When he placed it on her desk, dried and perfect between 2 sheets of wax paper, her eyes went wide with genuine wonder, and she touched the translucent petals with a reverence that made his throat tight. He told her a story about his first shift. A clumsy, chaotic affair that ended with him stuck halfway up a tree with his hind legs dangling, howling in a voice that cracked between human and wolf, while his mother laughed so hard she had to sit down in the mud. He had never told anyone that story. It was the last truly happy memory he had of his mother. He gave it to Serafina like an offering, and to his astonishment, she laughed. It was not a loud laugh, but a soft, breathy sound, like wind chimes caught in a gentle breeze. As she laughed, her hand came up to cover her mouth, and her eyes, for just a moment, glowed. Not the silver blue of before, but a flash of deeper sapphire, there and gone so fast he might have imagined it. His wolf did not imagine it. His wolf howled. Cassian and Ronan had clapped him on the back later that evening, congratulating him on securing the next milestone. Kieran had just nodded, a sick feeling churning in his stomach. The bet felt like a dirty secret, a rotting thing hidden beneath the floorboards of something beautiful. He found himself changing. The boredom and arrogance that had plagued him were replaced by anticipation. He looked forward to their quiet moments in the archives, to the way she argued with him about historical interpretation with a fire that belied her cold exterior. He started to see the world through her eyes, noticing the small, quiet beauties she cherished. His wolf, which had been so restless for years, was now calm, content to simply be near her. It recognized her, he realized with a jolt that nearly buckled his knees. Mate, it whispered in his soul, a word so profound it shook him to his core. She was his mate, the broken, supposedly wolfless Omega. The palace healer, old Miriam, had once told him something during a late-night conversation about the mysteries of the mate bond. "The bond doesn't care about rank or power, Your Majesty," she had said. "It cares about souls. And sometimes, a wolf can recognize its mate, even when the other's wolf is buried so deep it's barely a whisper. The bond reaches past the silence." Serafina was his mate. Her wolf was not dead. It was buried, trapped under layers of grief and trauma, and his wolf had sensed it all along. The bet was no longer a game. It was a sacrilege. He went to Cassian and Ronan that very night. "The bet is off," he told them. "It's over." Cassian raised an eyebrow. "You can't just quit, Kieran. You're winning." "I said it's over." Ronan leaned forward, something sly in his expression. "We made a pact, brother. Wolf's honor. You can't unwind a wolf's honor bet without all three parties agreeing. And I don't agree. I've got gold riding on this. Besides, what are you going to tell her? That you started courting her because of a wager? That'll go over beautifully." The trap closed around him. They were right about the pact, and they were right about the confession. If he told Serafina now, while the bet was still technically active, it would look like he was only confessing to end the wager. She would never believe his feelings were real. He decided to wait. He would prove his devotion was real first, build something so strong that when the truth came out, it could withstand the blow. It was a coward's plan, and he knew it. He was becoming his father, making calculated decisions about love. And the self-loathing that followed was a poison he carried silently. The night of the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, Kieran found Serafina in the garden where their strange courtship had begun. A fresh layer of snow covered the ground, muffling all sound. She was wrapped in a simple wool cloak, her face tilted up to the star-dusted sky. "They say the veil between worlds is thinnest tonight," she said, her voice soft as falling snow. She did not seem surprised to see him. "What do you hope to see?" he asked, moving to stand beside her. "Nothing," she confessed. "I just like the quiet. It feels like the world is holding its breath." She paused, then spoke again, her voice smaller. "My mother used to bring me out on the solstice. She would hold my hand and tell me that the longest night was the moon goddess's way of giving wolves more time to dream. I haven't thought about that in years." It was the first time she had ever voluntarily spoken of her family to anyone. The words came out halting and raw, as if they had been locked in a chest for a decade, and the hinges were rusted. Kieran felt the weight of that trust like a sacred thing placed in unworthy hands. He reached out, his movements slow, and gently tucked a stray strand of silver blonde hair behind her ear. A shiver ran through her, and in her chest, the warmth that had been growing for weeks flared bright and urgent. It was not a flutter anymore. It was a pulse, a heartbeat that was not hers, something ancient and wild trying to wake. Her eyes met his. The careful neutrality was gone. "Kieran," she whispered, the first time she had used his name without his title. "Serafina," he breathed. He wanted to tell her everything, about the bet, about his shame, about the fact that she was his mate. But the words tangled in his throat, choked by terror. "Not yet. Not tonight." "My wolf recognized you from the first moment," he said instead, and this, at least, was the purest truth he had. "I was just too blind to see it." Tears welled in her eyes, freezing on her lashes. "I thought I was too broken to be seen." "You were never broken," he said. "You were waiting." He framed her face with his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheekbones. I love you, Serafina Cole, with everything I am. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She leaned into his touch, her own hands coming up to rest on his chest, over his wildly beating heart. The contact sent a tremor through her entire body, and deep in her core, the buried things stirred violently, a growl so low it was almost subsonic, vibrating in her bones. She gasped. I love you, Kieran Blackwell, she whispered, the words a fragile offering, a surrender of everything she had spent a decade protecting. Joy exploded in his chest. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, and just breathed her in. Tell her now, his conscience screamed. But he was a coward, and the moment was too perfect, and he could not bear to shatter it. Tomorrow. He would tell her tomorrow. Serafina felt like she was floating. The world, which had been muted and gray for so long, was suddenly bursting with color. She walked back toward the servant's wing, a real, genuine smile on her face. His cloak was wrapped around her shoulders. He had draped it over her when she shivered, and it was enormous on her small frame, carrying the warm scent of pine and storm and something that smelled like home. For the first time since she was a child, she felt safe. She wanted to give him something in return. In her quarters, she had been working on something in secret, a small leather journal in which she had been pressing flowers from every walk they had taken together, annotated with the dates and the things he had said that made her feel alive again. She would leave it on his desk as a surprise. She changed direction, clutching the journal to her chest, her heart hammering with a giddy nervousness she barely recognized in herself. She moved through the corridors of the royal wing, her footsteps light, her scent carrying a note of warmth for the first time in years, living lavender instead of its faded ghost. She was nearly at his study when she heard voices through the partially open door, low, celebratory. Cassian and Ronan. She paused, not wanting to be seen with the journal. She would wait until they left. And then the words reached her, clear as a blade. I have to admit, I didn't think he could do it, Ronan was saying, his voice full of grudging admiration. 5,000 gold, Cassian. Pay up. The grand prize? Already? Cassian sounded impressed. Just now, in the garden. I followed them, couldn't resist, and I heard it with my own ears. I love you, Kieran Blackwell. Ronan mimicked her voice, high-pitched and breathy, and then laughed. The Ice Queen has officially melted. Our king gets the girl, and we get a lighter purse. A beat of silence, and then Cassian chuckled. Did you see his face when she smiled that first time, over that stupid tea? He spent an hour with the cook getting the blend right. I almost felt bad taking the 500 gold from him. Almost. 1,000 for the hand-holding by the fireplace was my favorite, Ronan added. But the moon petal, that was the masterstroke. Did you know she told him her favorite flower during one of their little archive sessions? The man rode 3 hours to the southern border and back, just to find a pressed flower that would score him another point. Textbook manipulation. Our king is a better player than any of us gave him credit for. The journal slipped from Serafina's fingers. It hit the stone floor with a soft sound that nobody heard. Inside her chest, the warmth that had been building, the nascent wolf that had been slowly waking for weeks, went silent. Not dormant, not sleeping. Silent. The way a living thing goes silent when it is struck so hard it forgets how to breathe. Every memory replayed in sharp, specific fragments, each one a knife. The tea. I remember everything you say. He remembered because she was a target. The bergamot and honey. An hour with the cook. 500 gold for the smile it purchased. The moon petal. 3 hours of riding, not devotion, but investment. She had touched those petals with reverence, had felt seen for the first time in a decade. And the whole time it was a calculated play, her wonder reduced to a line item in a ledger. His first shift. The story about being stuck in the tree, his mother's laughter. She had given him the story of her mother and the solstice in return, had cracked open the most guarded chamber of her heart because she believed they were trading vulnerabilities. But he had been trading currency, and she had been spending everything she had. To think, all this for a bit of sport, Cassian was saying now. Well, the Alpha King has proven his point. No woman is immune to the great Kieran Blackwell. Now he can get back to the serious business of choosing a proper, highborn mate. This little Omega was a fun distraction, nothing more. Seraphina's hand went to her stomach. Her body folded forward as if she had been punched. She caught herself on the stone wall, her palm flat against the cold surface, and pressed her other hand over her mouth to keep the sound inside. Her knees wanted to buckle, but she locked them. She tasted bile at the back of her throat. Her vision blurred, not with tears but with a white, blinding nothing that ate the world from the edges in. The warmth in her chest was gone. In its place was a cold so profound it felt like the night her parents died, like being 10 years old and curled on frozen ground, refusing to cry because crying meant accepting that the people who loved you could be taken away. She had let herself forget that lesson. She had let herself believe. And the world had taken it away again, only this time it was worse, because the person who destroyed her had held her face in his hands and called her precious while doing it. She straightened. Her hand fell from the wall. She picked up the journal from the floor, her movements mechanical, precise. She tucked it under her arm. She turned and she walked away. She did not run. She did not make a sound. Her back was straight. Her chin was level. When she reached her quarters, she closed the door and stood in the center of the small room. She opened a drawer, placed the journal inside, and closed it. Then she looked at the cloak. His cloak, still draped over her shoulders, still carrying his scent. She stood there for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached up and unfastened it. She held it in her hands. It was heavy and warm, and it smelled like him. She brought it to her face, just once, just for a breath, and then she folded it. She folded it with the precise, mechanical care she used when handling the most fragile documents in the archives, corner to corner, edge to edge, until it was a perfect rectangle. She placed it in the center of her bed. A message. A returned costume from a play that was over. She sat on the floor beside the bed, her back against the wall, and wrapped her arms around her knees. She did not cry. The pain was too vast for crying. The walls she had so cautiously begun to dismantle rebuilt themselves in the silence of that room, not made of ice this time, but of cold, unbreakable steel. Kieran found Cassian and Ronan in his study. A celebratory bottle of aged brandy was open on the table, and a heavy purse of gold coins sat beside it. "To the king!" Ronan cheered as Kieran entered. "The conqueror of hearts, the melter of ice!" Kieran stared at the purse, then at their grinning faces. The joy that had filled him curdled into black dread. "What is this?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Your winnings, my friend," Cassian said, pushing the purse toward him. 5,000 gold for the grand prize. You did it! You won!" He looked from the gold to their faces, and the full weight of what he had done crashed down upon him. He had stood in the moonlight with his mate and basked in her declaration of love, knowing it was the final point in a sordid game. And in that moment, staring at the gold, he saw his father. He saw the man who had signed a mating contract instead of making a vow, who had let Kieran's mother die alone while he attended to business. "Get it away from me," he snarled, his voice dropping to a feral growl. His eyes flashed pure gold. The air in the room grew heavy, crackling with his fury. "Kieran, what's wrong?" Cassian asked, his bravado failing. "It was just a bet, a bit of fun." "Fun?" Kieran's voice was a whip crack. "You dared me to play with the heart of an innocent, wounded woman. You put a price on her smile, on her trust, on her love. And I was arrogant enough, stupid enough, cruel enough to agree." He slammed his fist on the table. The wood groaned and split. The brandy bottle shattered, its contents spilling like blood. "She is my mate," he roared, the words torn from his soul. Cassian and Ronan stared, their faces pale. "Your mate?" Ronan stammered. "She is mine," Kieran snarled. "And I have destroyed her." He advanced on them, his shadow swallowing them whole. You are stripped of your ranks, effective immediately. You will report to Commander Theron at the northern border garrison at dawn. If I see either of your faces in this citadel before I summon you, I will consider it a challenge to my authority. Get out. The words were imbued with the full force of his alpha command. They scrambled back and fled. Kieran stood alone, the scent of brandy and his own despair filling the air. He raced to her quarters. The door was unlocked. The room was neat, Spartan, and empty of warmth. On her bed lay the folded cloak. He picked it up and held it to his face. Her scent was on it, but wrong. The warmth, the living lavender, the hope, all of it was gone. It smelled only of cold stone, the scent of a woman who had retreated so far inside herself that even her body had stopped reaching out. He sank to his knees, the cloak pressed against his chest, and for the first time since his mother died, the Alpha King wept. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. Seraphina did not leave the citadel. She simply vanished from his life. She requested a transfer to the deepest, most remote level of the archives, a subterranean vault where no natural light reached. She took her meals in her room. She did not walk the grounds. The pack buzzed with gossip. The story of the bet leaked within a week. Cassian and Ronan, banished to the frozen border, had been loose-lipped in their disgrace. The pack was divided. Some condemned the king's cruelty. Others dismissed the Omega's feelings as unimportant. The whispers followed Kieran everywhere. His first attempt to see her was met with a closed door. "Seraphina, please, let me explain." No answer. He could feel her presence on the other side, her scent now just cold stone. She was there, she was just refusing to exist for him. His alpha instinct screamed at him to break down the door, to command her to face him. But he had used his power to break her. He would not use it again. So he began to wait. Every morning, before the sun rose, he stood outside her door for an hour. Every evening, the same. He never knocked again. The guards grew accustomed to the sight. He stopped attending to himself. His hair grew unkempt, his jaw shadowed. He ate when reminded, slept in fractured hours. At a public gathering to address a territorial dispute, a lesser alpha named Draven openly challenged his judgment. "Perhaps our king is too preoccupied with his Omega troubles to lead," Draven said, loud enough for the hall to hear. Kieran looked at him. In the old days, he would have crushed the challenge with a single display of dominance. Now, he just looked tired. He handled the dispute with quiet competence and walked away. He did not punish Draven. The pack murmured. Their invincible king was diminished, and everyone knew why. After a week of vigils, he began to write. The first letter was a mess of apologies, desperate and rambling. He slid it under her door. Nothing. The next day, he did not apologize. He remembered. "The first time you smiled, it was snowing. I had brought you tea. I did spend an hour with the cook that morning, but not because of a bet. Because the night before, you had wrapped your hands around a cold mug of plain tea, and I thought, she deserves warmth. She deserves someone to notice what she likes. When you smiled, I felt it in my chest like a crack forming in something I didn't know was frozen. It had nothing to do with gold. It was you, Seraphina. It was always you. Do you remember when you laughed? I told you about falling out of the tree during my first shift. That story is the last memory I have of my mother laughing. She died that winter, and my father did not even hold her hand. I have never told another living soul that story. It was sacred to me, and I gave it to you, not for a wager, but because you were the only person I trusted enough to hold it. The moon petal. Yes, I rode 3 hours. Yes, I searched frozen meadows with numb fingers. But I did not do it because you were a target. I did it because you said you'd only ever seen one in illustrations. And the sadness in your voice made me want to give you every real thing you'd only ever seen in pictures. He wrote about his father, about the cold mating that had killed his mother's spirit, and about his terror of becoming that man. The bet was proof that I was already him, he wrote. I treated your heart like a contract to be won. That is my father's sin, and I inherited it. But I am not writing to you as his son. I am writing as the man who stood in a frozen garden and meant every word. The man who loves you did not make that bet. The boy who was afraid of his own heart did. During this time, Kieran did something he told no one about. He had learned from the archives that the Cole family had once had a small estate in the eastern forests. After the rogue attack, the property had been seized by the crown and left to decay. He sent a trusted team to the ruins. They found, buried in the rubble, a smoke-damaged but intact wooden chest. Inside was a hand-bound journal of songs and stories written by Alara Cole, Seraphina's mother, and a small silver pendant in the shape of a crescent moon, engraved on the back with the words, "For my little moon, who will always have light, even in the longest dark." He had the pendant cleaned and the journal restored. He did not sign the package. He did not include a note. He had it left at her door wrapped in plain cloth. No name, no claim, no expectation. This was not about winning her back. This was about giving her something she had lost. Inside her room, surrounded by his letters and the impossible recovery of her mother's journal and childhood pendant, Seraphina waged a war with herself. She had not opened the first few letters, but her resolve cracked. She opened one, then another. She read them, determined to see manipulation in the pretty words. But the details were too specific, too personal. The memory of the tea, the secret of his first shift, his mother's death. Those things felt like wounds, not weapons. And the pendant around her neck, the one she had put on with shaking hands the moment she recognized her mother's handwriting. The pendant she had not taken off since. That was real too. She did not know who had sent it. She was afraid to hope. She wanted to hate him. It would be so much easier. Hate was ice, and ice was safe. But as she read his daily offerings, a different emotion surfaced. Not forgiveness, but a terrible, aching sorrow that recognized its own reflection in his words. He sounded as broken as she felt. The man who wrote these letters was not the man who had made the bet. This was a man disassembling himself on paper and sliding the pieces under her door, one by one, asking her to see the wreckage and decide if anything was worth salvaging. Winter retreated. The spring equinox arrived. Kieran stood outside her door for the last time. He slid the final letter under. Seraphina, today is the equinox, the day the bet was supposed to end. It ended for me the moment you smiled. I will not stand outside your door again. I cannot force you to see me, and my presence only causes you pain. The council wants me to choose a high-born mate for political alliance. I have refused. I will refuse every time. There will be no other. There was only ever you. I love you. That was never part of the game. It was the only part that was ever true. Forgive the man, if not the king. Kieran. He pressed his palm flat against the door, just for a moment, then he turned and walked away. A king who had lost his kingdom. Inside, Seraphina read the letter with trembling hands. The finality of it, the quiet despair, the revelation that he had refused other mates, broke through the last of her defenses. He was giving up. He was letting her go, respecting her silence even though it was killing him. It was the one thing she could not defend against, because all her walls were built to withstand siege, not surrender. A great, shuddering sob escaped her lips, the first sound of grief she had made since that night. The tears she had refused to shed flowed freely. She looked at the door. He was gone. For weeks, his presence on the other side had been a torment and a strange comfort. She had pressed her hand against the door some mornings, matching where she imagined his stood, hating herself for the gesture. Now, only emptiness. And she realized that the silence he left behind was infinitely worse than the pain of his presence. She was not ready to forgive him. But she was not ready to let him disappear either. She scrambled to her feet. She turned the doorknob. The latch clicked. The hallway was empty. His scent lingered, already fading. She found him in the training grounds, savagely attacking a practice dummy with a wooden sword. Shirtless despite the chill, muscles corded, sweat glistening. He looked like a man at war with himself, and he was losing. Dark circles under his eyes, hair unkempt, thinner. "Kieran," she said. He froze mid-swing. He turned slowly, his eyes wide with disbelief. Seeing her standing there, he looked like he was seeing a ghost, and was terrified it would vanish if he breathed. "Serafina," he breathed. The sword fell from his fingers. She took a slow step toward him, then another. She did not run. She did not smile. She stopped a few feet away. "Your letters," she began. "I read them. All of them? Every lie? Every truth?" She looked at her hands. "The bet was cruel. What you did broke something inside me I didn't think could break again." "I know," he said. "Serafina, I am so sorry." "I know." She paused, and something hardened in her expression. "But I am not here to forgive you." His face fell. She almost broke. Almost. "I am here because your last letter said you would stop coming, and I realized that losing your presence hurt more than having it. But that does not mean I am ready to trust you. The woman who loved you in that garden does not exist anymore. This woman needs more than words on paper." He nodded, accepting the blow. "What do you need?" "Time," she said. "And honesty. Complete, total honesty. About everything. The bet, your wolf, what was real and what was performance. From your mouth, not parchment. And I need to decide, on my own terms, whether the man underneath the lie is someone I can trust again." "I can give you anything," he said, and his voice broke. "Anything you need, for as long as it takes." "Then we start over," she said. "Not from where we were, from the beginning. And this time, there are no games." She turned and walked away. She did not look back. Kieran stood in the training yard watching her go, and the crushing weight on his chest shifted. It did not lift. It was not forgiveness. But it was a door left unlocked. The days that followed were the hardest of Kieran's life. She allowed him to visit the archives again, but the ease was gone. She asked questions, direct and unflinching. When the bet was made, the specific terms, whether every visit had been calculated, whether the tea, the books, the moon petal, the story of his mother had all been moves. He answered everything, hiding nothing. Yes, the first visits were calculated. Yes, the tea was initially a tactic. No, the story of his mother was never part of any plan. He told her about his father, about the cold marriage, about his terror of becoming Aldrich. He told her about trying to cancel the bet and being trapped by Wolf's honor. He told her about the moment his wolf whispered mate. He told her about the gold purse and seeing his father's face staring back at him. She listened. She did not soften. But she did not freeze him out. They built something new on the wreckage of the old, slowly and painfully. It was during one of these conversations that she asked about the pendant. "My mother's journal," she said, her hand going to the silver crescent at her throat. "And this. They were left at my door. No note." He was quiet for a moment. "I sent a team to your family's old estate. They found them in the ruins. I had them restored." Her eyes widened. "That was you? But there was no name." "It was not about me," he said. "It was about your mother. You deserve to have her words back, whether you ever spoke to me again or not." Her hand tightened around the pendant. She did not speak for a long time. When she looked at him, her eyes were bright, and for the first time since the betrayal, the steel in her gaze had a crack in it that was not made of pain. Weeks passed. The thaw was glacially slow, but it was real. She let him bring tea again, though she watched him drink first. She let him walk beside her, though she kept distance. She told him things she had never told anyone, not as surrender this time, but as choice. She told him about the plate in the center of the table, about the lullaby she could never finish. And one morning, 2 months after the equinox, she did something unexpected. She brought him tea. She appeared in his study doorway holding 2 mugs, her face neutral, but her hands shaking slightly. "Bergamot and honey," she said. I asked the cook. Kieran took the mug. He did not make it into a grand moment. He simply drank, and she sat in the chair across from his desk, and they shared a silence that belonged to both of them. 3 weeks later, on a warm spring evening, they were walking in the garden. Serafina stopped beneath the tree where he had first tucked her hair behind her ear. "My wolf," she said, and her voice had a tremor that was not fear. "She has been waking. Slowly. For weeks, maybe longer. Since the archives. Since before the solstice. I felt her, little flickers. When you touched me, she stirred. When you told me about your mother, she stirred. She was waking because of you, and when I found out about the bet, she went silent. Wounded." She looked at her hands. "She has been coming back. Slowly, carefully, the way I have. And tonight, she is loud, Kieran. She is so loud." Her eyes lifted to his, and they were glowing. Not a faint flicker, but a deep, steady sapphire that pulsed with her heartbeat. For the first time in her life, Serafina Cole growled. Low and fierce and full of a power neither of them had known she possessed. Kieran's wolf answered, a deep rumble that vibrated through the night air. His eyes blazed gold to match her sapphire, and the mate bond roared to life between them. "She knows you," Serafina whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She has always known you." He stepped toward her slowly. She closed the remaining distance herself and placed her hand on his chest, exactly as she had on the solstice. But this time, she was not surrendering. She was choosing. "I forgive you," she said, and the words were not fragile. They were forged in fire and pain and months of rebuilding. "Not because you deserve it. Not because your letters were beautiful, or because you found my mother's journal, or because you stood outside my door every morning. I forgive you because I refuse to let the worst thing you ever did define the rest of my life. And because the man you became in the breaking is someone worth loving." Tears ran down his face, and he made no move to hide them. He covered her hand with his own. "I choose you," he whispered, "before all witnesses, seen and unseen. My mate, my other half." Her wolf howled inside her, and the transformation that followed was not gentle. It was explosive. Sapphire light burst from her skin, and where Serafina had stood, a silver she-wolf now stood, her coat shimmering like moonlight on water, her eyes twin sapphires blazing. She was magnificent. She was powerful. She was anything but broken. Kieran shifted to meet her. They stood nose to nose, and she bumped her muzzle against his, tender and fierce. They ran that night, streaking through the ancient forest like silver and shadow, a freedom she had never imagined. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in the citadel. The pack had watched the entire saga unfold, the courtship, the betrayal, the vigils, the slow rebuilding. Opinion was divided. Many of the highborn alphas still saw Serafina as unsuitable. The Council of Elders formally opposed her as Luna. "She cannot be your queen," Elder Maeve declared. "The pack needs a strong, alpha-born Luna." Kieran opened his mouth to respond, but it was Serafina who stepped forward. She was learning. Her wolf, newly awakened, was still raw and unpracticed, but she was not weak, and she was done letting other people speak for her. "I am Serafina Cole," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Daughter of Marcus and Alara Cole, who gave their lives defending the eastern border. I am an Omega. I am also the only wolf in this room who has survived the thing you all fear most. And I did it alone, at 10 years old, with no wolf and no pack to protect me." The hall was silent. "You want a strong Luna? I have been strong since the night I watched my parents die and chose to keep living. You want a Luna who understands duty? I have served this pack in silence for a decade. You want a Luna who can endure? Ask your king how long I can hold a wall." She paused, and her sapphire eyes swept the room. "I am not asking for your approval. I am telling you who I am." No one spoke. Elder Maeve held her gaze for a long moment, then inclined her head, the the smallest gesture of acknowledgement. It was not acceptance, not yet. But it was the first crack. The real shift came 2 weeks later, not in a council chamber, but in the mud. A violent spring storm had caused the eastern river to swell, flooding the lower quarters where the pack's elderly and young families lived. The water rose fast, and the evacuation was chaotic. Kieran was on the far side of the citadel dealing with a collapsed bridge when word reached him. He ran, but Serafina was already there. She had heard the alarm and moved on instinct. She waded through waist-deep, freezing water to reach a cottage where an elderly she-wolf named Amma was trapped, too frail to climb to higher ground, too proud to call for help. Serafina broke through the swollen door with her shoulder, a move that would have been impossible weeks ago, but her newly awakened wolf gave her strength she was still learning the shape of. She lifted Amma onto her back and carried her to safety, her legs shaking, the water dragging at her clothes. She went back twice more. Once for a litter of pups whose mother was injured, carrying them in a sling made from her own torn cloak, wading through water that reached her chest. Once more for a young wolf who had fallen and broken his leg, dragging him to the evacuation point while the current tried to pull them both under. She was shaking violently by the time Kieran reached the scene. Her lips were blue, her skin ice cold, and she was standing in the mud, directing the remaining evacuations with a calm authority that stopped him in his tracks. He had never seen anything more beautiful or more terrifying. She was not doing this for him. She was not doing this for the council. She was doing it because these were her people, and she had decided to claim them. The pack saw it. They watched their supposed ice queen, the wolfless Omega, the unsuitable Luna, pull their children and their elders from the flood with her bare hands. By the time the waters receded, the whispers had changed. Not the ice queen, their queen. It was Cassian who came next. He had been recalled from the northern border a week after the flood, not by Kieran, but by Serafina. She sent the summons herself, and Kieran did not know about it until Cassian was already in the citadel. She met him alone, in the archives, her territory. He looked different. Leaner, weathered, the arrogance scoured from his face by months of frozen wind and hard labor. He stood before her desk, the same desk where Kieran had first placed a book and brushed her fingers, and he could not meet her eyes. "My queen," he said, the title still new and strange in his mouth. "You summoned me." "I did," she said. "Not as your queen, as Serafina Cole, the woman whose heart you helped destroy for sport." He flinched. "I want to hear it from you," she continued. "Not a performance. Not words chosen to make yourself feel better. I want you to tell me what you were thinking when you suggested the bet. What you thought of me. What I was to you." He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I thought you were nothing," he said. "That's the truth. I didn't see a person. I saw a challenge, a joke, a way to amuse ourselves on a boring night. You were the punchline, and I didn't care, because you were an Omega, and you were quiet, and you didn't matter to me." He swallowed. "I was wrong. I was cruel, and I was wrong. I mocked your voice. I put a price on your pain. I watched Kieran falling for you, and instead of telling him to stop, I egged him on, because the game was entertaining. That is who I was. I am not here to ask for forgiveness, because I know what I took from you, and sorry doesn't cover it." The silence stretched. Serafina studied him. "You're right," she said finally. "Sorry doesn't cover it. And I may never forgive you." She paused. "But I am choosing to let you come back. Not because you've earned it. Because this pack needs its beta, and because holding this anger is a weight I no longer want to carry. You will earn back your place through actions, not words. And if you ever treat another person in this pack as a punchline, I will be the one who sends you to the border. And I won't bring you back." Cassian looked at her then, and what he saw in her eyes was not ice. It was steel. "Yes, my queen," he said. "It was not redemption, but it was a beginning." On the night of the summer moon, the first full moon after the floods, the pack gathered in the great hall for the formal bonding ceremony. Serafina stood at the entrance of the hall, and for a moment, She did not move. She looked down at herself, at the simple white gown she wore, at her mother's crescent moon pendant warm against her skin. She could feel every eye in the room, the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, their grudging respect. 6 months ago, she would have frozen under that weight. She would have retreated behind her walls and counted the minutes until she could escape. Now, she took a breath. She thought of Amma, of the pups, of the young wolf with the broken leg. She thought of the archives, of her mother's lullaby, of the plate in the center of the table. She thought of the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming, and she understood that they were not different people. The Ice Queen and the Luna were the same wolf. One had survived by building walls. The other survived by choosing which walls to keep and which to let fall. She stepped into the hall. The room went quiet. She walked the length of it alone. Kieran waited at the far end, and when she reached him, he did not take her hand. He waited for her to take his. She did. "Seraphina Cole," he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "You are my mate, my other half. Will you do me the honor of standing beside me, not behind me? Will you be my queen?" She looked at him, at the man who had started with a lie and burned himself alive trying to make it true, at the imperfect, flawed, stubbornly devoted man who had knelt outside her door every morning and sent an anonymous team to find her mother's pendant, and stood silent while lesser wolves challenged his authority rather than use the power that had hurt her. He was not the king from the fairy tales. He was better. He was real. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. He leaned in and pressed his forehead to hers, and the mate bond between them hummed like a living thing, gold and sapphire, storm and moonlight. The hall erupted in howls. Not all of them were joyful, not all of them were convinced. But enough were, and the ones that weren't would come around, or they wouldn't, and Seraphina found she was at peace with that. You could not melt every heart. You could only stay warm. Later that night they slipped away. They shifted under the full moon, their transformations seamless. His form was a massive black wolf, a creature of power and shadow. Hers was a sleek silver she-wolf, her coat shimmering, her sapphire eyes bright. They bumped noses, a silent affirmation, then they ran. Side by side they raced through the ancient forest, their paws silent on the mossy earth. They were not a king and queen, not an alpha and omega. They were just two wolves, running free. The night air carried the scent of pine and lavender, storm and moonlight, and somewhere behind them the citadel glowed warm against the dark, full of wolves who were still learning to see their queen, and a queen who was still learning that she did not need to be made of ice to be strong. She just needed to be herself. The forest swallowed them, silver and shadow, and the moon watched. And the story was not over, because the best ones never are. But for tonight, they ran, and it was enough.